Ah, The Cruelest War. I Want to Be a Shell 2008 Toho Phylum. This story was first broadcast on what is now TBS Radio in 1958. It was aired on TV many times with different actors, but I remember the best one being the one starring Frankie Sakai on TBS in 1958. The suicide note in this work was apparently modeled after one written by a real person, Tetsutaro Kato. Well, the theme of this movie is I Want to Be a Shell. But if you haven't seen this movie yet, can you imagine what kind of movie it is? Before I saw it, I thought it was a comedy, but it turned out to be a comedy. This is a very tragic anti-war movie. I have tried many times to watch this movie until the end, but I have never seen it all the way through. The reason for this will be explained before end of this explanation. Well then, we'll start. That was in 1944. The story takes place about 3 years after World War II began on December 8, 1941. Shimizu Toyomatsu Masahiro Nakai, who runs a barber shop in the fishing port town of Kochi, was born in poverty. He was treated as a poor boy at a young age, and has lived in poverty due to his bad feet. He met Fusei Yuki Nakama, opened his own shop, and the three of them lived modestly together. However, the war becomes even more intense, and Toyomatsu, who has a bad leg, receives a summons. Toyomatsu couldn't hide his upset, and was hesitant about how to tell his wife. That's natural. Everyone thinks that they will receive a summons at some point, but when it actually arrives, it is normal to feel uneasy even if you are prepared. Fusei could not hide her dismay, but she cut off her husband's hair, as he was determined to be a shaved hair when he went to war. Toyomatsu reminisces about the time when he and his wife worked at the same barber shop, while having their hair shaved, how they fell in love, had a child, and were fired from the barber shop. He remembers vowing to run the company. Toyomatsu, who has been made a shaved head, salutes in front of the boy and acts playfully, but Fusei's laughter turns to tears, and she can't hide her anxiety as she wonders what will happen next. Many people from the neighborhood gather to celebrate Toyomatsu's dispatch of troops, and they all sing Yasukoi Bashi, a folk song from Kochi. I wrote that we celebrate here, but in reality it is not a celebration, but rather a final farewell of sadness. But why do we celebrate going to war for the country of Japan? Toyomatsu is assigned to the Homeland Defense Unit led by Lieutenant General Yano Koji Ishizaka, and undergoes rigorous training. In the intense heat, he was trained to pass under ropes while holding a gun as quickly as possible, and to walk long distances through the mountains, sometimes falling from the hills due to exhaustion. Toyomatsu didn't normally walk long distances, so his bad legs probably made training harder for him than for the others. And the war situation worsened day by day. It depends on your age, but have you ever heard of the name B-29? This is an American fighter plane from World War II, and was used during the American air raids on the Japanese mainland near the end of the war. These air raids began in April 1942, got into full swing in June, and were repeated every day from December until the day the war ended. Japan's 100 largest cities were hit by air raids almost every day, and the number of Japanese killed, including those from the atomic bombs, is said to have exceeded 410,000 civilians alone. In any war movie, you hear the roar of fighter jet engines and sea lines of fighter jets lined up, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels like I'm being sent to hell just by hearing that sound. One day, the American crew of a B-29 shot down by the Japanese descends on the mountain behind the mountain, and Toyomatsu's team is ordered to dispose of it. Toyomatsu is ordered by his captain Koji Ishizaka to stab the crew member, who was already a dead insect, to death with a bayonet, and he is forced to do so and rushes towards the prisoners screaming in fear. At that time, it was raining heavily, and no matter how ordered Toyomatsu and another soldier were, they were unable to bayonet the tight American soldier who was dying, despite being told that it is an order. The battle between Toyomatsu's mind, which is psychologically cornered to the point where he feels he has to do it, and Toyomatsu's mind, which is unable to kill someone no matter what, unfolds in full screen. I couldn't help but feel tired watching it. This is because human psychology in its extreme state can turn any human being into a demon. At the end of the war, Toyomatsu returned to his barber shop and resumed his business. One day, Toyomatsu is taken away by police and American soldiers in a jeep as a war criminal who killed a prisoner of war. Toyomatsu desperately tells himself that it was a mistake, and he can go back soon. Along with his former superiors, He was to be tried for the murder of the POW at the 8th Army Military Tribunal in Yokohama, when he is drawn into the war and ordered to kill American soldiers. His peaceful daily life is short-lived until something happens that makes his heart stop beating again. The child and Fusey run after the jeep crying, but Toyomatsu is cruelly taken away. Toyomatsu, who replies that his superior's orders were the emperor's orders, is laughed at by the Americans and asked why he did not refuse. Toyomatsu desperately complained that Japanese privates, the most novice, were being treated like cows and horses. I don't think Americans will understand the emperor's orders that Toyomatsu complained about, or that privates are being treated like cattle or horses. You can tell from the judge asking him why he didn't say no. Toyomatsu claims that if he refuses, he will be shot. But the American judge only knows about the American military, so he hardly believes what Toyomatsu says. This was a completely unilateral decision by the United States, and there was no way for the Japanese people to be saved. Soldiers who did not listen to orders were ordered and threatened by their superiors, the Japanese ally, to shoot them. If you are ordered to kill soldiers of another country, you have no choice but to do so. If the chain of command is one-sided and the war progresses without taking into account opinions from below, the motivation of the soldiers will inevitably disappear. By the way, I have seen and heard many times that this is an order from His Majesty the Emperor, or long live the Emperor. In particular, on August 15, 1945, the end of the war, when His Majesty the Emperor's voice was broadcast over the radio, people near the Imperial Palace sat on the gravel, their heads pressed against the ground, and listened to the words of His Majesty the Emperor. Listen, I have seen many pictures of myself crying. That image gives the illusion that it is the image of the majority of the people. But is that really the case? I imagine that the hearts of the majority of the people were not concerned with the Emperor, but with a sense of relief that they were glad the war was over, and that they would no longer have to prepare for death. Therefore, I believe that during the war, statements such as orders from His Majesty the Emperor were meant to deceive the soldiers. I can't help but feel sorry for the soldiers who were misled by these words. I am convinced that most of the true feelings of the dying people were the sadness of being separated from their parents and siblings. Next, I would like to introduce the IMPL operation from Burma to India, which is still famous today, and tell you about the atrocity of the Japanese military. Just before the end of the war, the Japanese army entered Rangoon, Burma, and from there, instead of traveling on a flat road 480 kilometers away, they simply rushed up the mountain to Impel, India, which was British territory. This road was named the White Bone Road. The reason for this was that many Japanese soldiers died of starvation, exhaustion, and British attacks as they moved forward. The British military commander later looked back on the situation and strongly criticized the Japanese military command, calling it a lack of moral courage. In Burma, the Japanese military commander had already dispatched the next group of soldiers even if the first group died, and almost all of them died without achieving any success. Without hesitation, Japanese military once again marched his troops to Impel. As Toyomatsu complained, military headquarters had no regard for human life, simply charging the animals because they didn't care if they died like cows or horses. Those who showed such disregard for human life and disobeyed orders from above were shot to death, even if they were Japanese soldiers. British military commanders strongly criticized the Japanese military for their lack of moral courage. This is not just Burma. When oil was running low and explosives were running out, Japan's strategy was to organize a kamikaze team, known as human bombs, in which small planes were loaded with bombs, and young first-year soldiers around the age of 20 crashed their bodies into warships. I heard that South Korea was the only other country that practiced suicide squads, but I don't know the scale of it. Even though Toyomatsu desperately tried to explain the truth about Japan's military in court, Americans could not understand it because of this abnormal way of thinking of the Japanese military. By the way, this is a movie, and I imagine it's mostly based on historical fact, if not entirely true. The big question in this historical fact is why only the Japanese who fought against the United States were put on trial and sentenced to death. The same was true of the Tokyo trials. There is absolutely no way that the US side did not commit any war crimes. The war should be a win-win situation. In addition, the most heinous of America's war crimes were the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the burning of Japanese non-soldiers in Okinawa. which occurred in 100 locations. No, it was the killing of Japanese citizens in a major air raid. Therefore, it is the Americans who will be punished. The subordination to GHQ at that time led to Japan's subordination to the United States today, and it led to the modern Japanese Prime Minister taking money, participating in the Japan-US summit meeting, and bowing down. It's a cartoon-like world where the person who gives you a lot of money bows to you. As a result of the trade friction between Japan and the US in the 1980s, the US economy deteriorated to an extreme degree, leading to the Plaza Accord in 1985, which led to an extremely strong yen. I have never heard of someone calling the United States and trying to reach an agreement by devaluing the yen when Japan's economy deteriorated. Trade tensions are simply the result of differences in how we use our heads and technology. We just need to use our brains more and make better products. A Japanese acquaintance of mine who repaired cars boasted that Ford, GM, and Chrysler, all of which were prosperous at the time, were cars for repair. We say this because the person doing the repair knows what kind of cars are repaired the most. It's not a made-up story. One theory says that this is because the country became a defeated country. But that interpretation is also incorrect. Why weren't both countries judged? This still remains strongly in my heart. It is said that MacArthur, the supreme commander of GHQ at the time, said that the Tokyo trials were a mistake. But it is easy to say that they were a mistake. The important thing is how to take responsibility for that mistake. America has not taken any responsibility. On the contrary, isn't it pathetic for Japanese people to just sit by and listen to the United States continuing to affirm that the atomic bomb played a role in ending the war? Now let's get back to Toyomatsu. The truth was that Toyomatsu was so frightened that he could only injure the prisoner, but could not kill him. The prisoner was so weak that he simply died. As his superiors are sentenced to death by hanging one after another, and everyone trembles in fear, Toyomatsu is also sentenced to death. Toyomatsu is the one who knows the truth, and why he was forced to kill an American soldier with a bayonet. But what is the death penalty? Onishi Suoshiku Sanagi, who shares a cell with Toyomatsu in prison, tells Toyomatsu that due to an increase in suicides, the cell has been changed to a double room, and the person who was previously in the cell was executed last week. In the meantime, the prison was filled with the sound of people chanting sutras. Toyomatsu asks Onishi what this is, since it's his first experience. Today is Thursday, but when Toyomatsu hears from Onishi that those to be executed are called every Thursday and the execution will take place at 12 a.m. on Friday, he becomes so desperate that he can't even stand. The sound of American soldiers' shoes echoes down the hallway. Onishi is worried about when he will be called, so he reads the Bible aloud. Later that day, Onishi was taken. Onishi thanks Toyomatsu and leaves. After Onishi came out into the hallway, Toyomatsu called out Onishi-san and Onishi-sama, but Onishi was taken away. Yano, a former lieutenant general, visits Toyomatsu's cell, admits his responsibility, and apologizes. He then told the general commander MacArthur that he had filed a request for a retrial, requesting that only he, as the commander, bear the blame. A lonely Yano asks him to visit his room. If he feels like it, Toyomatsu cuts Yano's hair in the hallway, and they continue to spend some warm time together. If Yano and Toyomatsu had known each other in a time of peace instead of war, they would have lived a happy life as friends who respected each other, but they would have both felt that the era in which they were born was bad. Truly, nothing hurts people more than war. The chaplain Komaya, Takea Kamika, visits Yano and gives him his posthumous post. Yano demands that America be judged for its crimes, and is executed after telling him that the sentences of those involved in his case should be commuted. When Komaya learns of Toyomatsu's feelings for his family, he realizes that he has not told his family about his sentence, so he writes a letter explaining the situation and summons his family. Nishizawa Shafukuri Churub, his roommate, is astonished to see Toyomatsu continuing to mourn for Yano, the person he should hate, and then is told that Fusi has come to see him. Toyomatsu and Fusi can't hold back their sobs. Fusi asks him why he didn't inform her, and blames her husband, but Toyomatsu tells her that the trial was wrong, and reassures her wife that he is hopeful that he will request a retrial. Toyomatsu kisses the baby's small finger. He kisses the finger of his son, who begged him to do the same, and whispers that he wants to go back to Tosa with everyone. Fusi desperately tries to gather signatures for a petition for her husband, and finally reaches her. goal of 200 signatures, and on her way back she gazed at the cape where she had sworn to her husband. When Fusi shows him the signature, Toyomatsu sheds tears and expresses gratitude for his wife's hardships. A prison where no executions have been carried out for a while. Meanwhile, a prison guard comes to pick up Toyomatsu. Nishizawa happily sends him off, thinking that his sentence has been commuted. However, Toyomatsu was taken away, because his sentence was to be executed tomorrow. Komae comes to see Toyomatsu, who is so shocked that he is dazed. Toyomatsu receives wine from Komae and drinks it all. Komae tells Toyomatsu that he has no choice but to believe in the afterlife, and he asks what Toyomatsu would like to be if Toyomatsu were reborn. Toyomatsu told Komae about his own life in poverty, and he started crying, saying that he wanted to be born rich when he was reborn. Komae firmly and gently hugs his shoulders. Left alone, Toyomatsu began writing a will to his family. I want to live with everyone again, but I can't do that anymore. If I could at least be reborn. I don't want to be a human anymore. I'd rather be a shell at the bottom of the ocean. I want to be a shell. Even though Fusi, who knew nothing, believed that her husband would return, Toyomatsu was forced to pass away. Now everyone, how did you feel when you heard this synopsis or saw this movie before? As I mentioned earlier, I've actually seen this movie many times on video and DVD starring Frankie Sakai, but I've never seen it all the way to the end, because it's so cruel that I can't watch it till the end. Despite this, why do I recommend this movie to everyone? My conclusion is that it is not important to watch until the end, but rather that everyone, including myself, understand why there is a world that seems like hell, and what we can do to prevent such a world from being created. I introduced this film with the idea that I wanted people to think about it. The theme of this movie is I want to be a shell. Toyomatsu wrote a letter to Fusi before his execution. He wrote a letter expressing his wish that he does not want to return to the ugly human world again, and that he would like to live quietly at the bottom of the sea, protected by a strong shell, without being disturbed by anyone, instead of in the human world. You can see that these words express a desire for peace from the bottom of their hearts. If anyone had experienced the extremely cruel act like Toyomatsu, in which he was forced by someone above him to kill a weak and dying American against his own will, everyone would no longer trust humans. There is no difference. Finally, I will summarize. Let's think about why World War II happened. In 1913, Japan invaded Manchuria, which led to World War II, where they fought against the Allied forces, but mainly against the United States. Looking back at history, before Japan invaded Manchuria, colonization centered on Asia was radicalized by Portugal, Britain, the Netherlands, Spain, France, the United States, and Japan imitated it. The United States, seeing Japan, and thinking that China south of Manchuria would be taken over by Japan, had to stop exporting oil to Japan and stopping Japanese people from immigrating to the United States in order to force Japan to withdraw from China. And they had a plan to make Japan's economy worse. World War II broke out when America thought it had no choice but to defeat Japan. Looking at this history, we can see that wars are caused by the instinct of self-interest to completely monopolize territory. This can be taken as a warning to not only insist on the rights of oneself or one's own country, but to be considerate so as to benefit others and other countries as well. On a global scale, starting from the home, from the region where one lives, from Japan, from Asia to the rest of the world, individuals are required to live their lives in a way that considers others than themselves and their own country.